things continued to get worse.
The antisemitism had been latent, now became open.
You didn't know if the Nazis would continue to rule the entire world.
Overnight, the world turned topsy-turvy.
Jews being beaten in the streets.
In the early morning,
There was a knock on my Zeydie's door.
a couple of SR people tell my father, you got 5 minutes to pack some stuff and come with us.
There was no future in Vienna for them. It was very unsafe to be Jewish. It was very unsafe to be anyone except for that pure Aryan stereotype. So they started to begin to figure out how to get out of there. I'm Miriam Malka Frankel. I'm from Queens originally, and I work at the Center for Jewish History as the social media coordinator, but I'm also a Jewish history journalist. We have the biggest population of Jews outside of Israel, I believe, and no matter where you are, there's always kosher food, there's always a wonderful Jewish shul to, go to, a wonderful community, and it's always a great place, for safety, of course, which is really paramount when you're picking where to live as a Jew, but also for community, so I love it here.
What's your name?
My name is Max Frankel. My Jewish name is Meir ben Yitzchak Frankel.
Anyone who goes through such a time of persecution for the Jewish people immediately begins to recognize the red flags that you see in the world today that are kind of showing what the world is turning to and how anti-Semitism is growing.
Where were you born?
In bed.
Yeah, you might have been. That's probably true. You were living probably in your home, yeah?
That's correct.
Do you know what time it was?
It was a good time.
Good time.
Jewish education was a common thread throughout his entire life.
Okay, and where would that have been?
That would have been at 39 Forststuber Straße, Vienna, Austria.
And I've often wondered, when my Zeydie was in Vienna under house arrest and definitely not free, what was that experience like, right? Was it depressing to know that they had had freedom and they had lost it?
There were limits to where you could go. The world didn't want us. So they loaded the people on buses and took them to the concentration camp. The beginning of 1938, January, February, there was a lot of unrest in Austria and Vienna particularly. We didn't know what the hell it was, but we could feel it.
So whenever my Zeydie would talk about World War II, he would always make sure to mention that his memories are those of a 10-year-old, not of an adult. But they were still very impactful and very important to talk about, and he did whenever my dad would ask.
And there was talk about an election coming up, a plebiscite, whatever. Who knows what it was, but it's going to be.
By early 1938, there was a lot of growing unrest in Austria, especially in Vienna, and my Zeydie remembers hearing conversations between adults about this upcoming election or plebiscite.
Do you have radio in your home?
A what?
They didn't have a radio. My Zeydie jokes that was for the rich.
A radio?
Are you kidding?
I'll take that as a no.
That's for the rich people.
Okay.
So sometimes they'd go over to their neighbor who did have one to try to listen to the news. But when Hitler spoke on the radio, he spoke in German from Germany, which was very harsh and very quick. The German that my Zeydie and his family spoke was from Austria, and it was much more delicate and slow. So even though they were both speaking the same language, they couldn't understand each other and they did not know what Hitler was saying, but based on his tone, they of course knew it couldn't be good, and it was decided that Austria would be annexed by Nazi Germany in what we now call the Anschluss.
Overnight, the world turned topsy-turvy. The Chancellor was arrested.
And replaced by these new Nazi Germany officials that nobody knew the name of, nobody knew who they were.
All of a sudden we heard new names coming up, the Austrian flag disappeared.
And replaced by the flags of Nazi Germany. And most impactful and memorable to my Zeydie was that people that he had grown up with in his very own building were now showing up in khaki uniforms and were either Nazi sympathizers, supporters, or Nazi officials themselves. And someone who had just been in his own apartment to paint it, he was a painter, was now a Nazi official and acted as if he didn't even know the family.
Jewish people were particularly frightened because the anti-Semitism had been latent, now became open.
Things continued to get worse, and my Zeydie remembers Jews being beaten in the streets and stores that were owned by Jews having signs placed in them that said, "Don't shop here, it's Jewish owned," or that the stores would get nationalized and stolen from the Jew. And my Zeydie also remembers Jews being forced to wear signs around their necks with derogatory slogans, especially pointed to Jewish women.
Women were forced to wear a sign around their necks, "I am a Jewish whore," that sort of thing.
And he remembers seeing out his very own window of his apartment.
People scrubbing the streets with toothbrushes.
While wearing a sign around their neck that said two animal names of what the Nazis saw as dirty animals. And this was part of a very clear dehumanization process that the Nazis did, both in the hopes that Jews would feel less than and feel like animals. I don't know if the public, if they hadn't seen this, would they have still thought the same? I'll never know. Hate, I think once you get caught up in it, is very easy to accelerate. And we saw that continue to happen, and that brings us to 1938 in November.
Kept on escalating. Of course, we had Kristallnacht.
The night of broken glass occurred, and that affected Germany and Nazi-occupied Austria. And it was a night when Jewish-owned businesses, Jewish homes, synagogues were burned to the ground and totally destroyed.
In the summer of 1938, in the early morning,
There was a knock on my Zeydie's door.
a couple of SR people tell my father, you got 5 minutes to pack some stuff and come with us.
We're taking you to police lockup, and of course his crime was being Jewish.
His crime for which he was rounded up was nothing more than the fact that he was
Being a Jew.
He's a Jew.
The police lockup only held about a few dozen Jews, and of course the Nazis wanted to take more Jews, so they had to decide what to do with the Jews already there to make space for the new ones.
So they loaded the people on buses and took them to concentration camps.
It's like Dachau and Buchenwald. But at this point, the final solution had not been passed yet, so they weren't calling for the extermination of Jews everywhere, they were just trying to get rid of them. And so they sent him back home on house arrest.
Because he was unfit for transportation because of his wooden leg.
That's the only thing that saved him at this point in time in his life.
No.
They could have shot him and be done with him then.
And at this point, my Zeydie's family knew there was no future in Vienna for them. It was very unsafe to be Jewish. It was very unsafe to be anyone except for that pure Aryan stereotype. So they started to begin to figure out how to get out of there.
The first thing parents are concerned about are their children.
So it's 38, they're all your siblings are sent away. They're not just sending you kids away. They don't know what their fate is at all.
But they would live.
At this point, the only people left in Vienna in my family were Meir, my Zeydie, and his parents Isaac and Branche Golda.
You're with your
I left
parents.
home with my parents. And we are in the house arrest.
Tante Lena and Tante Dora go door to door in New York, knocking on doors, talking to strangers, anyone who would listen, to now raise the required $1,500 to $3,000 to bring them over with those immigrant bonds.
To send an affidavit, which is an invitation to come to live in the United States, you had to put up bond.
So you wouldn't become a...
You would become a public dependent on public funds.
Mm-hmm.
They receive affidavits, they're able to secure those, but still there is much more to go through to be able to come to America.
Now we had problems in Vienna. First of all, we needed passports to get out, and we needed to get exit permission.
You need to pass medical examinations that are done at the American consulate.
Because we were concerned about people bringing in disease.
And one thing to note about my Zeydie and his parents were they definitely didn't have great vision.
My mother's glasses were about a half-an-inch thick at the rim and wafer thin in the middle.
You had to pass all these medical examinations, including a vision test. So Branche Golda, Isaac, and Meir, my Zeydie,
We memorized the charts,
so that whatever they point to on the board, they already know the answers.
and I'm sure the doctors knew damn well.
So at this point, they've received everything they need. The passport, the affidavit, the exit permissions. They've passed the medical examinations.
And we left by train to Italy in February of 1940.
Where they stayed for 3 to 4 days before boarding the SS Eternia, a ship that took them out of Italy to the United States on its final journey during the war.
And which was the last journey she made out of Italy before Italy entered the war.
Eventually, they did reach New York Harbor, and my Zeydie doesn't remember seeing the Statue of Liberty.
I have no recollection of
You
the
don't?
Statue of Liberty.
When he was finally allowed off, he was sent to Ellis Island.
We spent probably a week or so there in Ellis Island. Again, the examined, medical examination and so forth. And there may have been some complications, I don't remember what. So we weren't discharged immediately.
So you stayed there for a
We
bit.
stayed up probably about a week or so.
But he did meet Tante Lena and Tante Dora on the dock,
Then we went to my aunt's apartment
In the Bronx.
in the Bronx.
and they took him to Bathgate Avenue to that Bronx apartment that they then lived in until he moved out.
How old was I?
Yeah, when you came over?
I was 12. This was 1940. I was born 1928.
When my Zeydie came over, he was just 2 years out of house arrest and did not speak a lick of English.
Not a single word. Didn't know yes or no. Nothing.
But he was a very smart kid, and so they enrolled him in public school in the Bronx, where he stayed until he eventually, got his bearings together, and he was switched over to a Jewish school that's now called SAR. While he was there, he eventually, picked up English, he started to excel, and he actually outscored his American peers.
And in the 2 years, I went from grades 4 to finished grade 8. But it's not that I was such an outstanding student myself. All the refugee kids were really much more bold than the American kids.
He graduated 8th grade in 1943, and he became a bar mitzvah.
Oh, my bar mitzvah was very fabulous.
Which is when you turn 13 and you start to be someone who's responsible for your actions and you're able to understand what you're doing. So in Jewish culture, we consider you an adult in the sense that if you make a mistake, you have to own up.
My aunt sent out invitations, so I'll show you an invitation. Max Korn.
This is the invite from that exact event. It says his name, Max, and the date of January 25th, 1941 at Congregation Beth Israel at 1731 Washington Avenue in Bronx, New York. So that was his shul that he went to for his bar mitzvah, and the reception was actually in their residence at 1789 Bathgate Avenue, apartment 1D. So that's where they lived, in Bronx, New York, and so it's really special that we get to have this. I get to see exactly where he was and when.
How did they take to the transition?
Life was not easy for him, but we kids never felt it. Our home is rich.
When they came to New York, Isaac could not continue his work as a glazier.
It's a different kind of work here than it was in Vienna.
He had before been fixing glass windows and making small glass objects in Vienna.
So he looked for something he could do. When he was a kid in Poland, he learned how to fix umbrellas.
Which nowadays, if we break our umbrella, we immediately throw it out because we can just buy a new one.
These were war years. Metal was very scarce.
Back then, items were really cared for, and until you literally could not fix it, it would get fixed. At the time, he couldn't afford to buy new materials to fix the umbrella.
Very expensive. Even when we were making new umbrellas, sometimes would use recycled because he couldn't get the metal.
So we'd walk through the streets of New York to try to find anything he could find that would work.
After a rain or something, I'd pick up discarded umbrellas. People threw away umbrellas because they broke or something. We'd sell them for $3, $4. Then eventually my father
made enough of an income to stop working out of his apartment in the Bronx and start a small storefront, as well as to buy new umbrella covers.
And that's how my father schlepped together the money on which we lived.
Something that I really liked when he was talking about the Bronx is that when he was in high school, he had a very long trek to school.
I'd walk over to Tremont Avenue.
To take a trolley, to take a bus over the bridge, till he got to one stop, and then to walk 6 more blocks to get to school. And he did all of this at 8 a.m., and then again when school ended at 5, he made that journey back.
Were there kids with whom you were commuting to school every day?
Coming home, there'd be some other kids in the bus.
Chatting with each other in different languages. What an interesting thing to have gone from a place where being diverse was, of course, the largest problem and safety issue that you could have, to now going here and celebrating it and speaking with everyone so excitedly. I thought that was such a beautiful representation of New York.
So I developed a little bit of a writing style.
He also was very passionate both in high school and in college about writing.
And I started to write a daily one-page gossip sheet, some real gossip, some made-up stories, whatever.
He was a very eloquent writer.
Which was called
Frankly Speaking. My last name is Frankel, as was his, so it was a little pun.
You had kept, through the years, a couple copies of The Commentator. One of the issues that you saved, which I have, is the issue when Israel was declared a state.
Mm-hmm.
He covered it as editor of his paper as a junior in college.
And the cover of it has the map of Israel superimposed on the cover.
He chose to have the state of Israel's image overlaid over the words with its new borders.
At this point, when you're starting high school, you're only in the country 2 years.
He adapted very quickly.
So in a very short amount of time, not only did you develop the writing skill, but you developed language skill.
Of course.
And then became someone who I think was such a wonderful writer. And he continued to be a very eloquent writer until his death. He worked in Boston, Erie, Philadelphia, Rochester, Cincinnati.
So I became a teacher.
He immediately began working in Jewish education, and he met my bubby because he was teaching a class of adult education.
To teach him Hebrew.
Whose name is Gloria. She actually, Baruch Hashem, bless God, is still alive and well.
When I became engaged to your mother, she joined the class too. And she told me not to call her because you know who kept me up last night. If I hadn't met your noble at that time, I would never have met your mother, you wouldn't be here.
They were wonderful parents, always made sure to have everything the kids could want there, always making sure they were proud of who they were, just a very warm household. And he continued to work in Jewish education, whether it was with children at like a JCC, a Jewish community center, or with adults. He made sure that he worked with really everyone in the religion. And he was principal, executive director, a teacher, anything he could do, any job he could get that showed his passion and showed what was important to him, that was something he did.
If you were to think of this video as being a what do they call it, an ethical will, right?
Mm-hmm.
What message would you like to pass on to your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren?
My Zeydie really, unless you asked him about it, they really didn't let the trauma affect them.
Be a mensch.
Be a mensch? What do you mean?
He was a very strong family man, and his focus was really just moving forward, not moving back.
I mean, behave in such a way that you're decent to your fellow human beings.
Though he did embrace the fact that you can't know who you are unless you know where you come from, but he didn't let it hold him down.
You know, be honest, be yourself.
In everything he did, in everything he was very good. He lived by the credo, live and let live.
Don't be afraid to stand up for what you believe in.
Be a mensch, be a good person, and hold true to your values, hold true to your traditions, be proud of who you are.
But don't force others into your mold.
Diversity is so important. It's what makes up America. We are a country built on immigrants. And he was very, very passionate that everyone deserves to be respected, everyone deserves to live a dignified life, and we should care for everyone.
You want to be Orthodox, be Orthodox. You want to be conservative, be conservative.
Being an immigrant who did come to the United States, to New York, he really did represent what New York was and what New York is. We are a diverse city, and a city that should be very proud of who we are for that. Even though my Zeydie has passed on, he continues to inspire me to be very passionate about Jewish education, about protecting Jewish history and our culture. Right beside my bed is a pen that he gave me when I was 4 for my first ever diary and journal. That was really the first time I started writing. Every time I get to pick up the pen and write a new story about this experience of our people, I'm very proud to be related to him. He was very kind, a great family man, a great educator, a very passionate Jew. He continued to move forward and grow with our family and was a wonderful man.
Say goodbye to your grandkids.
Love and kisses.
I have one last question for you. When your time comes and you meet Hashem, what's going to be the first question you're going to ask?
How come you let me in?
With that, that's the perfect sentence.